Right now, in a brightly lit emergency room, a patient is actively ignoring the life and death advice of a doctor with a decade of rigorous medical training.
Yeah.
And they're doing this because a generative algorithm on their phone just told them something different. They are literally sitting on the examination table, bypassing the human expert standing 3 feet away to trust a probabilistic text generator.
Which is, I mean, it's terrifying, but it's happening every single day.
Exactly. This isn't some theoretical scenario mapped out in a white paper. This is the new, unsettling reality of modern trust. And this micro-level interaction, a single patient staring at a piece of glass, is the front line of a massive global power struggle.
Right.
We are looking at a multi-billion-dollar battle over the 20% of the global GDP that is healthcare. Human expertise built over centuries is being quietly, systematically usurped by algorithmic authority.
And the most critical thing to understand here is that this transition of authority is not happening where the media thinks it is.
No, not at all.
If you look at the public narrative, everyone is captivated by the Silicon Valley leaderboards. They're watching the titans OpenAI, Google, Anthropic just duke it out over parameter counts.
Right, the race to superintelligence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is a complete distraction. The real battle, the one that is actually going to dictate the future of global healthcare, the security of your patient data, the economics of medicine, that's grinding away in the administrative back offices of hospital systems.
Yeah.
It is a brutal and entirely unglamorous war over legacy software integration, legal liability, and just the sheer crushing weight of enterprise infrastructure.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We
Yeah.
are taking you straight into the mechanics of this cautious, incredibly high-stakes consolidation of artificial intelligence. We're stripping away the venture capital hype.
Right.
We want to look at the structural forces actually shifting the ground beneath our feet. And our primary lens for this is Dr. Bob Watcher.
Yeah, the chair of medicine at UCSF.
Exactly, author of The Digital Doctor and The Giant Leap. Someone who sits at the absolute epicenter of this collision between cutting-edge code and legacy healthcare.
And we're also looking at the evolution of modern digital identity.
Yeah.
Right? How individuals are curating their online footprints to establish authority entirely outside of traditional institutions.
Yeah, using the digital trajectory of researchers like Kartiki Keshwarwani as a baseline for that psychological shift. Because this isn't just about implementing a new software tool.
No.
This is about power. It's about money, data security, and the fundamental identity of what it means to be a patient or a physician in the 2020s.
To really grasp the gravity of this systemic overhaul, we have to establish who is actually steering this massive ship of digital transformation. I mean, the reason Dr. Wachter provides such a critical perspective is precisely because he is not a hardcore technologist coding in a vacuum.
Right, he's not living in a bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He is deeply embedded in the messy, operational, human reality of a major medical system. He approaches the technological landscape almost as a journalist or an anthropologist.
Well, there's that deeply humanizing, almost bizarre historical detail about him from our sources that I think perfectly illustrates the kind of adaptability required to survive this moment.
Oh, the mascot thing.
Yes. In 1979, Bob Watcher was the University of Pennsylvania Quaker mascot.
I love that detail.
He was literally running around a basketball court wearing a three-corner hat, bifocals, knickers, a red top coat, and a ruffled white shirt.
And he was the mascot for the last Ivy League team to go to the Final Four. Right?
Yeah, exactly. They beat Syracuse, St. John's, and UNC before walking into a brick wall and losing 45-7 against a Michigan State team, a team led by Magic Johnson in Salt Lake City.
It's just such a specific historical moment.
Yeah.
And while it sounds trivial, that trajectory going from wearing knickers on a basketball court to navigating the absolute zenith of modern medical bureaucracy at UCSF, it's a brilliant metaphor.
It really is.
It represents the radical adaptability you need to survive in healthcare today. Watcher actually notes that his lack of formal computer science training is his greatest asset.
Because he doesn't lose the forest for the trees.
Right. He isn't blinded by the mathematical elegance of a large language model. He's looking squarely at the deeply flawed, heavily regulated human system that this code is attempting to infiltrate.
Okay, let's unpack that infiltration, because this disconnect between the elegance of the code and the reality of the clinic is exactly where the overarching narrative completely derails.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Every single day, my feed is flooded with breathless headlines about the race to AGI. But Watcher points out that targeting superintelligence is entirely the wrong metric for healthcare. Why is that? Why doesn't it matter if a model aces the U.S. medical licensing exam?
Because it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of the industry's center of gravity.
Hmm.
Superintelligence implies a model that can theoretically solve any complex cognitive task instantly.
Right.
But practicing medicine at a systemic level is not a purely cognitive exercise. It's not just taking a test. It is an administrative, regulatory, and infrastructural labyrinth. The center of gravity for healthcare tech does not sit on a sleek, glass-walled campus in Silicon Valley.
No, it sits on a sprawling corporate campus built on a farm outside of Madison, Wisconsin.
Exactly. Epic.
Epic Systems,
Yeah.
the incumbent electronic health record.
Yeah. The EHR is the absolute scaffolding for all professional and patient work in modern medicine. A decade ago, the EHR was essentially a digital filing cabinet for doctors and billing departments.
Just digitizing paper records?
Right. But today, because of the proliferation of patient portals and integrated telemetry, it is the total operating ecosystem.
Yeah.
Epic has a massive, almost impenetrable incumbency advantage.
So it doesn't matter how good the AI is.
Not at all. You could design the most brilliant AI model in human history, an algorithm that can diagnose obscure autoimmune diseases from a single blood panel in, a fraction of a second. But if that model does not integrate natively and seamlessly into the specific interface that a physician is already forced to click through for 10 hours a day,
It's useless.
it is effectively useless. It will not be adopted.
Which really highlights the massive gulf between consumer-level experimentation and enterprise reality. Like Watcher talks about this concept of vibe coding.
Oh, right, with Claude.
Yeah, he was playing around with Claude using natural English to write these miniature scripts for himself, feeling incredibly proud of this frictionless interaction. And then his son pointed out that he could have achieved the exact same result in Excel.
Which is classic.
Right. But that represents the current state of consumer AI. It's playful, it feels magical, but ultimately the stakes are virtually zero.
Yeah. Contrast that vibe coding with the rigid, unforgiving enterprise environment of a hospital. If a consumer LLM hallucinates a recipe, your dinner tastes bad.
You order takeout.
Exactly. But if an enterprise AI hallucinates inside a hospital workflow, it could trigger a fatal medication error,
Which leads to a massive malpractice lawsuit.
a sentinel event investigation, and the immediate freezing of the technology. The stakes are just astronomically higher.
And this brings us to the core economic standoff of our time. It's the agility of the startup ecosystem versus the monopolistic control of the incumbent. Silicon Valley is entirely predicated on the idea that innovation flows from highly agile, venture capital-funded startups that move fast and break things.
Right.
But how does that ideology survive in an industry where breaking things literally means breaking human beings? How does a legacy incumbent like Epic maintain such ironclad control when billions of dollars in VC money are actively trying to unseat them?
Well, to understand why, you really have to look at the physics of hospital administration, and specifically the IT integration backlog.
Okay, break that down.
The public has no idea how difficult it is to deploy software in a hospital. Our sources highlight a staggering operational ratio. For every single IT request or new software tool that a major health system actually manages to implement, there are 100 sitting in a backlog that will never see the light of day.
1 to 100.
1 to 100.
Hmm.
A hospital simply cannot buy 50 different point solutions. If you are the chief information officer of Stanford or UCSF, you cannot physically or legally manage a standalone contract for an AI scribe from Company A, an AI scheduling bot from Company B, and a diagnostic tool from Company C.
Because every single one of those vendors requires their own security audits, right? Their own data sharing agreements, their own custom APIs to talk to the EHR.
Exactly. It is an integration and compliance nightmare. So if a startup only does one thing, even if they execute that one thing with absolute perfection, they are effectively dead in the water in the long term.
They can't survive as a standalone feature?
No. A point solution must eventually become a broad platform, or it will be systematically crushed by the incumbent. Epic essentially acts as the Google of the healthcare ecosystem.
That's a great analogy.
Think about how we navigate consumer software. You might find a standalone email client that has slightly better UX than Gmail, or a word processor that is marginally faster than Google Docs.
But you use the Google Suite anyway.
Right, because it's completely integrated. Your data moves fluidly between the apps, and the friction is zero. Epic operates on the exact same gravitational principle.
So even if the startup's product is better,
Epic might eventually roll out an AI tool that is only a B+, while a VC-backed startup is offering an A+. The hospital will choose Epic's B Plus tool every single time
Wow.
because it's already integrated. The security architecture is already vetted. The patient data never has to leave the existing firewalls. And critically, the hospital knows with absolute certainty that Epic will still be solvent and supporting the product in 5 years. Most startups will not.
That is just a brutal economic reality check. And really quick, if you are listening to this and finding this kind of unfiltered structural analysis of macroeconomic forces valuable, drop a like or a comment wherever you get your audio. It actually helps us figure out which industries we need to tear down to the studs next.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's stay on this because what you were describing presents an existential threat to the legacy software business model itself.
It is the defining tension of healthcare economics right now.
Because for 20 years, healthcare tech has relied on a highly lucrative, highly predictable model. You build a specialized enterprise software package, you sell it to a hospital system, you charge a massive per-seat licensing fee for every single doctor and nurse that uses it, and you operate on 80% margins.
Right. The traditional seat license model.
But if a sufficiently capable large language model can act as an abstraction layer, if it can just sit on top of the hospital's entire operating system and bypass the traditional user interface entirely, if a doctor can just speak into their phone and say, organize my afternoon schedule, bill this patient for a complex consultation, and draft the clinical note. And the AI seamlessly routes those commands through the necessary backend systems without the doctor ever clicking a mouse. Doesn't that completely obliterate the seat license business model?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. Do LLMs commoditize existing software, reducing it to invisible plumbing, or does the incumbent simply absorb the AI as a native feature of its existing monopoly?
Right.
The source analysis uses a highly illustrative analogy here. When you go to a dealership to buy a modern car, you do not expect to pay an additional third-party monthly subscription for AI-enabled windshield wipers or an AI-enabled steering wheel.
It's just a car.
Exactly. The automation simply becomes what the car does. It is an expected feature, not a standalone product.
So Epic just absorbs it.
The massive economic battle over the next 3 years is determining exactly where that line gets drawn. Does artificial intelligence remain a distinct, highly valued product that disrupts the incumbent EHR, or does it rapidly degrade into being just the windshield wipers on Epic's car?
And while the C-suite executives and the hospital IT departments are having this philosophical, slow-motion debate moving at a glacial pace, requiring 37 different committee approvals, conducting endless vendor risk assessments just to test a single tool.
Yeah, to ensure nobody gets killed.
Right. While they do that, the doctors on the floor are not waiting.
They are entirely out of patience. And this brings us to the deeply concerning phenomena of shadow IT.
This behavioral quirk is fascinating to me because it is entirely rational on a human level, yet structurally terrifying. You have these massive institutions paralyzed by risk mitigation, but the actual physicians are burning out.
You're drowning.
Drowning in administrative bloat. So what do? They are walking the wards, they pull their personal smartphones out of their white coats, and they are inputting highly complex, incredibly sensitive clinical data into commercial tools like GPT or open evidence.
Yeah. Dr. Wachter gives a highly specific example of this organic adoption.
Walk us through that.
It's a doctor typing into a consumer chatbot, quote, "I have an 82-year-old patient with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, presenting with a fever and a creatinine of 3. What do you think?"
Let's pause and explain the stakes of that specific query, because a creatinine of 3 is not just an arbitrary metric.
No, it is a massive clinical red flag. A normal creatinine level is typically around 1. A creatinine of 3 indicates that this elderly patient's kidneys are actively failing.
Their body is losing the ability to filter toxins.
Exactly. And when you combine acute renal failure with a fever in a patient who already has leukemia, meaning their immune system is severely compromised, you are looking at a patient who could crash and die within hours.
It's a life or death situation.
It is an incredibly high-stakes, hyper-complex medical puzzle. And the doctor, rather than relying solely on the hospital's approved, clunky medical databases, is taking this critical diagnostic dilemma and feeding it into a third-party algorithm hosted on an external server.
Which is a massive regulatory time bomb. When a doctor does this, they're acting entirely rationally on an individual level. They want to save the patient.
Right. They're using the best available technology to reduce their cognitive load.
But structurally, they're completely bypassing the hospital's secure infrastructure.
And it creates immense, almost unquantifiable liability. We were talking about severe violations of EPA in the United States and equivalent data protection frameworks like GDPR in Europe.
Even if they don't use the patient's name.
Even then, inputting that level of hyper-specific chronological and biometric data into an unvetted commercial server exposes the hospital system to massive legal jeopardy.
So does this organic, thousand flowers blooming adoption by the frontline staff actually force the hand of these slow-moving institutions? Like, do the hospitals have to natively integrate these AI tools immediately, if only to build a walled garden and contain the liability?
They will be forced to, yes. The
Yeah.
pressure is entirely bottom up, but the institutions are terrified. And if you look at the history of medical technology, their fear is entirely justified.
Because of what happened 40 years ago?
Right. The very first wave of artificial intelligence in healthcare attempted to tackle the holy grail of medicine immediately.
Yeah.
Autonomous diagnosis.
And it failed.
Spectacularly. Those early expert systems were brittle. They failed to account for the nuance of human biology, and the resulting clinical and legal backlash effectively killed the field of diagnostic AI for decades.
Wow. So they carry that trauma.
Hospital administrators carry that institutional memory. They know that a high-profile AI medical failure today, an algorithmic hallucination that bypasses a doctor, directly leads to a patient's death and becomes a massive front-page story, could freeze enterprise adoption instantly.
So they're weighing that against the shadow IT risk.
They are constantly weighing that catastrophic systemic risk against the localized daily danger of moving too slowly while their exhausted staff covertly bypasses security protocols.
It is an impossible tightrope. But this entire economic standoff assumes that the hospital remains the ultimate gatekeeper of care. What happens when the patient, who is increasingly desperate and losing faith in these very institutions, decides to bypass the system entirely?
Oh, that's already happening.
How does this technological shift collide with the current global crisis of faith in human experts?
We are operating in an era defined by the collapse of institutional trust. Across the globe, populations are increasingly skeptical of medical professionals, established health systems, and government health bodies.
Yeah, the trust is just gone.
There is a profound anecdote in the source analysis from Dr. Graham Walker that crystallizes this dynamic. He's an emergency physician in San Francisco.
The story about the hill, right?
Right. He lives on a dangerous, incredibly steep hill with a documented history of severe pedestrian accidents. He notes that when he is crossing the street and sees a human-driven car approaching, he feels genuine, visceral fear.
He assumes the worst of the human driver.
He assumes the driver's distracted or incompetent, and he will physically scamper out of the way. But if he looks up and sees a Waymo, an autonomous driverless vehicle, he feels perfectly confident crossing the street in front of it.
He explicitly trusts the algorithm over the human being behind the wheel.
Because it is a rational calculation based on the data he has internalized about human error, fatigue, and distraction versus algorithmic consistency and sensor arrays.
And we're seeing that map directly onto medicine.
Exactly. Apply that exact same psychological framework to medicine. We're seeing patients exhibit extraordinary, sometimes wildly undue trust in incredibly human-like generative chatbots, precisely because their foundational trust in human institutions is at a historic low.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This completely reverses the traditional safety paradigm. In the tech world, the ultimate failsafe has always been the concept of the human in the loop.
Right.
The assumption was always that an AI model would draft a diagnosis or propose a treatment plan, and a highly trained, deeply cynical physician would be the human in the loop, catching any subtle hallucinations or mathematical errors before they ever reach the patient.
Yeah, the Dr. X is the filter.
But what happens when the human in the loop is not a doctor with a decade of training? What happens when the human in the loop is a terrified patient sitting alone in their living room at 2 a.m.?
It creates a massively dangerous vulnerability. Peter Lee, one of the leading figures in AI research, has spoken extensively about the cognitive complexity of medical queries.
Yeah.
When a seasoned physician uses an AI tool, they are performing a highly sophisticated cognitive act. They're taking 100 different variables from the AI's output, synthesizing them, and evaluating them against a vast, deeply ingrained internal library of clinical patterns and past patient encounters.
They can spot the anomaly.
Exactly. But when a layperson uses it, Watcher uses the example of his own mother. If she inputs her symptoms into an LLM, she lacks the foundational medical architecture to differentiate between a brilliant, life-saving synthesis of her condition and a response that sounds highly authoritative, but is actually a dangerous hallucinatory fabrication.
And there's data to back this up. Jeff Fowler, a technology reporter for the Washington Post, ran a highly revealing experiment alongside Dr. Wachter to test this exact vulnerability.
Yeah, the 12 prompts experiment.
Right. They fed 12 distinct clinical patient prompts into GPT, and some of the AI's diagnostic responses were outstanding, arguably more thorough and accurate than what an average overworked physician might produce during a rushed 15-minute consultation.
Which is impressive, but
But one or two of the answers were actively demonstrably dangerous. They recommended actions that would harm the patient.
yeah.
If the patient is the final arbiter of that information, they are effectively playing Russian roulette. We are expecting lay people, who are often operating in a state of fear and physical pain, to perform expert-level verification on highly confident algorithmic output.
And this ties directly into a much broader societal shift regarding how individuals construct their identities and establish authority in the digital age.
It's a massive democratization of tools.
It is, but it simultaneously triggers a complete fragmentation of truth. Just as patients are abandoning the physical clinic to ask a chatbot about their failing kidneys, professionals across the globe are curating their own digital footprints to establish baseline authority entirely independent of legacy institutions.
Like the Kartiki Kishorwani example from our sources.
Exactly. Look at how researchers and professionals like Keshawani are building their presence today. They aren't just relying on a static bio page hosted on a university server.
Right. They are curating highly specific, independent digital portfolios.
It is a vital parallel to the healthcare shift. In the past, your identity, your credibility, and your authority were entirely granted by the institution you belonged to.
The specific hospital where you had privileges, the university that granted your degree.
Right, the corporation that hired you. The institution was the gatekeeper of trust. Today, a meticulously curated digital presence acts as the modern baseline for identity. Individuals are building their own gravitational pull.
And patients are doing the exact same thing with their medical knowledge.
They are curating their own understanding of their biology from decentralized algorithmic sources rather than relying solely on the institutional authority of the hospital.
It is a complete inversion of the gatekeeping model, but we have to ask the foundational question. Why are patients doing this?
Yeah.
Why would a rational person risk taking medical advice from a chatbot that might confidently hallucinate a lethal drug interaction?
It is a combination of sheer desperation and systemic lack of access. If you look at the data, there is a powerful overlay between what public health experts call care deserts, geographic areas located more than 30 minutes from a major health system or primary care provider, and the highest volume of AI health queries.
People who physically can't get to a doctor.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But it is critical that we do not view this purely as a rural, low-income phenomenon. The system is breaking down everywhere.
Even in major cities.
Even in immensely resource-rich, highly physician-populated areas like San Francisco, Boston, or Palo Alto, the infrastructure is fundamentally broken. Trying to find a primary care doctor who is actually accepting new patients can take 6 to 8 months.
And mental health access is even worse.
Trying to find a psychiatrist or a psychologist who will take insurance or who charges less than $300 an hour out of pocket is nearly impossible for the average citizen.
So the demand for instant, affordable access is simply overpowering the acknowledged risks of the technology. People are in pain, they're anxious, and they feel abandoned by the system. And then they look at their phone, and the LLM answers them immediately at 3 a.m. for absolute zero cost. It never rushes them out of the room, it never judges them for asking a stupid question, and it has an infinite, unyielding bedside manner.
It provides the illusion of infinite empathy combined with infinite knowledge. And when the alternative is waiting 6 months in pain, the choice becomes obvious for millions of people.
I mean, we want to know what you think. If you're listening right now, would you trust an AI diagnosis over a human doctor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's stimulate some debate on this because it's a terrifying choice to have to make.
It really is.
Which brings us to the ultimate trajectory of this structural breakdown. We are looking at a 10 to 20-year horizon. As Walker pointed out in the analysis, medicine is historically inherently slow.
Glacial.
The average time for a new healthcare advance, a proven, peer-reviewed concept, to go from discovery to widespread clinical implementation is 17 years. 17 years.
It's astounding.
And generative AI, in its current highly capable form, exploded into the public consciousness a mere 3 years ago. So what happens when the rocket pace of generative AI development hits the absolute unyielding brick wall of medical conservatism?
To accurately predict the future, we really have to look closely at historical precedent. 30 years ago, Dr. Wachter actually coined the term hospitalist in a seminal paper for the New England Journal of Medicine.
Right.
Prior to that publication, the concept of a generalist doctor who exclusively took care of patients inside the hospital did not exist. The traditional model was that a general practitioner would wake up early, round on their admitted patients in the hospital, and then drive to their private clinic to see outpatients for the rest of the day.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. When Wachter proposed a dedicated class of physicians who never left the hospital, the backlash was incredibly severe. He faced massive institutional resistance.
The source notes that his own father's tennis partner, an older established physician, openly told him he hated him for destroying the traditional sacred model of continuous medical care.
It is the classic immediate immune response of a legacy institution protecting its norms.
Because medicine is profoundly conservative. Human lives are on the line.
Exactly. But eventually, the hospitalist movement hit an absolute tipping point. The structural demands of the medical system, new residency duty hour limits, the skyrocketing complexity of inpatient care, the need for immediate on-site emergency responses made the old model physically and economically untenable.
So they were forced to change.
Today, attempting to run a modern medical center without a massive staff of hospitalists is literally impossible. The system adapted because it had to.
So what is the tipping point for AI? Because unlike the massive transition to the electronic health record 10 years ago, which was essentially a binary top-down federal mandate driven by the HATE-Tech Act, where every doctor had to switch to digital records overnight or face severe financial penalties.
Right, that was forced.
These new AI tools, like ambient scribes, are currently opt-in. A hospital might purchase 50 licenses for an AI tool, and the physicians can choose whether or not to integrate it into their daily workflow.
Well, the tipping point won't be a federal mandate this time. It will be an absolute economic and practical inevitability, driven by invisible financial incentives.
All of the money.
Always. Let's break down exactly how a doctor generates revenue in the United States. It is based on RVUs.
Relative value units.
Yes. This is the literal currency of medical billing. Doctors are not paid based on how much time they spend holding a patient's hand. They are paid based on the complexity of the medical decision-making they officially document in the EHR.
Oh.
If an AI scribe allows a physician to seamlessly document a much higher level of complexity, capturing every single nuance of the conversation without the doctor having to spend an extra 30 minutes typing it out at the end of the day, that doctor's RVUs will skyrocket.
Because the AI is capturing everything perfectly for the billing context.
Exactly. The hospital generates significantly more revenue, the doctor earns a higher bonus, and critically, the doctor gets to go home to their family at 5 p.m. instead of midnight. The physicians using AI will simply outproduce, out-earn, and outlast the physicians who refuse to adapt. Within a decade, attempting to practice medicine without an AI scribe and diagnostic support overlay will be virtually impossible. The sheer volume of biometric data and the financial pressure will demand it.
But there is a massive macro constraint here that the Silicon Valley narrative aggressively ignores. We cannot talk about scaling enterprise LLMs globally without talking about the physical constraints of the grid,
The energy issue.
the geopolitical and supply chain battle over electricity and specialized compute. Running inference on a trillion parameter model for every single patient encounter across thousands of hospitals requires vast amounts of energy.
Right.
This isn't just software living in the cloud. This is heavy industry. Data centers are already draining local electrical grids. That physical reality acts as a hidden, unyielding ceiling on how fast these enterprise solutions can actually scale across the global healthcare system.
That is the ultimate physical limit of the AI revolution, and it dictates our long-term scenarios. When we game out the 10 to 20-year consequences, we have to look at the extremes.
Okay, what's the best case scenario?
The best case scenario is a methodical, heavily regulated, safe integration. The myriad of AI tools consolidate into mega platforms like Epic, solving the integration nightmare.
The AI handles the crushing administrative burden.
Exactly. Significantly reducing physician burnout and fundamentally returning the doctor's focus back to the patient rather than the computer screen.
And the worst case scenario?
A deeply dystopian fragmentation of global care. A world where the wealthy have access to elite, highly augmented human doctors who synthesize the AI's flawless data with profound human empathy and intuition.
While the poor.
While the poor, the uninsured, and those living in geographic care deserts are relegated entirely to hallucinating chatbots with absolutely zero human oversight.
A completely two-tiered healthcare system based entirely on algorithmic access and electrical infrastructure.
But the most realistic outcome lies somewhere in the middle, driven by that relentless structural consolidation we talked about. Over the next 10 years, the 1,000 blooming flowers of independent AI healthcare startups will wither, run out of venture funding, or be aggressively acquired.
Yeah.
The enterprise reality demands a single, unified, highly secure workflow. Epic, or a platform of its immense monopolistic scale, will absorb these capabilities. And when that happens, medical knowledge itself will be commoditized.
So what does this all mean? Which forces us to ask the ultimate question, what is a doctor, really?
Yeah.
If diagnostic knowledge itself becomes a commoditized, flawless, invisible feature built directly into an Epic dashboard, if the machine can instantly and always produce the mathematically correct medical answer based on the patient's telemetry, then the core value proposition of a human physician fundamentally shifts.
Absolutely.
The doctor of the future will no longer be valued primarily for their encyclopedic memory or for their ability to memorize thousands of drug interactions.
Right. They will be valued for having the uniquely human empathy required to look a terrified patient in the eye, hold their hand, and guide them through the clinical answers that the machine provides.
They will transition from being the sole oracle of knowledge to being the human translator of algorithmic truth.
And that transition will redefine the economics and the ethics of medicine for the next century.
Next time you sit in a doctor's office, I want you to look closely at the screen they are typing into. That screen, not the brilliant doctor sitting across from you, and not the agile startup in Silicon Valley, is the true center of gravity. That enterprise software is what will ultimately decide the future of your healthcare.